Kris here, Green Sabre, Doom Telly Time, episode 91. And today's episode is yet another idea that I'm stealing directly from Metal Mickey. So thanks for the great ideas, Metal Mickey. But he did another recent video that I thought, that's a good idea. I'm going to have a whirl at that. So I am. So without further ado, updates, I suppose. GODTHRYMM, no enormous updates so far, although I'm round at Hamish's again this week to continue the bulking out of the writing process for the new album, so that's going really, really well. So it's been a couple of weeks since I've been round, so back at it tonight. So very much looking forward to that. Not tonight, sorry, Wednesday night, whenever you're watching this anyway. So I'm recording this on Monday. So anyway, not that you fucking care, you might watch it in a year's time. Right, enough fucking waffle. So that's GODTHRYMM update. The Green Sabre update, nothing to report since our last two-piece gig that we did with Mastiff recently at the Underground in Bradford. The only other thing I've got to advertise so far is we're doing a charity event at Studio 5 Live, is it called, in Keighley. That's at the end of June. That's the only other thing that we've got planned at the moment, because we really do need to start zeroing in on recording the new stuff. So I'm trying to not take too many other gigs as such. I mean, we've been offered a couple actually, and just availability fucked us, to be honest with you. Otherwise, I might well have taken them. But anyway. But yeah, that gig in Keighley, Studio 5 Live, there's four of us on. Camian are opening. We've played with them before at the Brewery Tap in Bradford a year or so back. Camian opening, then Note are on. It's the guys from Note, shout out, Note from Huddersfield. It's the guys from Note that have set this gig up as well. They're next on. We're penultimate band on in Green Sabre, and then Sonobora headlining. It's going to be a cracking night. Like I say, it's a charity do, and I can't remember exactly what the fucking charity is, so I will be more prepared next time. But any road. Saturday, June 28th, I want to say. So that's the next thing that we've got in the calendar. But besides that, nothing else to report on the Green Sabre front. CROWSBLOOD, rehearsals in earnest, because we're in the fucking studio in about 5 or 6 weeks' time. So that is looming ever nearer. We were hoping to get an 8th song sorted, but I just don't think we're going to have the time. However, the 7 that we've got, we're going to go with. So very much excited about that. That 7 will include the 2 from the demo. So 5 other new ones that we're just polishing, fine-tuning, and crucially, getting some lyrics and vocals sorted for the other 5. I've got some place markers in for various vocal ideas for them all, but yeah, it's just a matter of fine-tuning it now because the clock is ticking. So those are the band updates. Right, let's crack on with vid. So a Metal Mickey idea, as I mentioned just earlier. He did a video about the 10 albums that got me into death metal, and I thought this is a good idea, this. Now, there's probably going to be a lot of repetition with other people that have done various videos on this, and I've watched a couple so far, but here's my 10 penneth. So the albums that got me into death metal, so they're not all necessarily death metal albums, but they sent me in that direction. And yeah, it was an interesting concept. I thought, right, I'm going to rifle through the albums and try and remember chronologically. Now, I'm an old bastard, so it's a long time ago now that I'm trying to remember. 1989, 1990 was when I got into death metal properly. And of course, as I may have mentioned on a previous video, my journey to death metal was a very quick drop off a cliff kind of moment. 1987, I started first getting into hard rock and metal, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Van Halen, other such fucking nonsense. That was my grounding as such in late 1987, early 1988, I want to say. Then that quickly morphed into Iron Maiden, where I got a mate did a tape up. If you like that shit, you'll love this, and he wasn't wrong. Live After Death was the 90-minute TDK that he gave me or whatever, and I never looked back. So it was Maiden from that point onwards. I never really deviated, and then Metallica and thrash metal got on the radar, and that was the major light bulb moment for me, where I descended into extreme metal. But I feel like the thrash metal years didn't even last a year before death metal had reared its head. So yeah, that's a bit of a quick preamble as to where I'm going to go. So the 10 albums that got me into death metal. So I'm going to start with this. Slayer's seminal 1988 album, South of Heaven, of course. And it was this album that first made me look towards the extremer end of metal. Yeah, it's a thrash metal record all day, but there's some... the reason I didn't pick Rain in Blood is that there is some more slightly evil-sounding riffs on this. And it was that evil kind of creepy vibe that really pushed me in the direction of death metal. And this album's dripping in... I mean, South of Heaven, for example, that opening riff, amazing. But then Silent Scream comes in. That's a very nasty-sounding 100 Mile an Hour track. Live Undead, the track, brilliant. That little solo off that comes at the end, fucking love it. Mandatory Suicide, of course. Anyway, I'm not just going to name all the fucking tracks. But this was the thrash album that made me realise there was another world out there, and I started investigating further. It was this one that tipped me in at the more extreme end of thrash metal, which led me to this. And I remember a mate playing this round at his house once fucking years ago. And yeah, that's what got me into it. But Creator's Extreme Aggression, and yeah, I've got much respect for the early fucking... for the early stuff, Endless Pain and Pleasure to Kill and those kind of records. But this is the one that resonates most with me because it's a Creator album that I got into him on. Coma of Souls one out at that point when I started listening to this. This was the most recent album with Betrayer and the title track, of course, on it. And this one was... I mean, you look back now, there's an almost black metal edge to certainly his vocal approach and some of the extremity of the speed of the riffage and so on. But... yeah, this was really, well, I mean, extreme aggression. And it felt like what it said on the tin. And it was a really aggressive move away from what I'd seen as the more mainstream American thrash and the British thrash stuff that I've been listening to as well. The likes of your Acid Rains and your Onslaughts and that kind of stuff. And this was, yeah, a major step in the extreme direction. So yeah, my second record that I'll mention is Creator's Extreme Aggression. That's still fucking ace now. The other one, and maybe a step backwards in the grand scheme of things, but it is the guitar tone on this record that is just razor blade-esque, and there are some extremely heavy moments on it. Nuclear Assault's Handle with Care. Very nearly got to see them on this tour, but I only found out that they played my local venue the day after. But anyway, I was technically too young to get into that venue anyway. So, but yeah, Nuclear Assault's Handle with Care. There's some absolute fucking rippers on here. The opening track, new song, Critical Mass, with that sort of and just how they threw the riffs together and just the heaviness of it. I mean, I remember thinking back then that it was the heaviest thrash album I'd heard, certainly at that point. And I think that a lot of that's in the production. It's so in your fucking face wallop. And again, this was another major step away from your conventional thrash for me. It was just, yeah, so heavy and extreme and a really guttural, in your face guitar sound that I fucking loved. So I wanted more of that. But yeah, this definitely was one of the peak thrash albums for me, and sort of still is. I think it's aged really, really well, this record. Yeah, I can't think that there's many other... You still got some of the daftness of Nuclear Assault on it, but it's a bit more grown up, is this album for them. So yeah, hang on, is that the third choice? Yeah. My third album that I pick on my journey to death metal, Nuclear Assault's Handle with Care. The fourth album I'm going to pick is the one that... now, I'm just looking at the fifth album that I'm going to talk about. Chronologically, these are all a bit uppy and downy. I feel like the album that I'm going to mention after this, I definitely heard before this, because I heard that before this was out, I think. But anyway... so yeah, chronologically, but I figured I've done it in this order in order to give you the descent angle that I went on as such like. So, but the fourth album I'm going to mention is besides the next one, I would say is the most important on that step to death metal. Because I still don't really know quite how to describe it. Is it a death metal record? Is it a thrash metal record? It's a bit of both. It's this. Sepultura, for me, their finest hour as well. Beneath the Remains. And there's so much thrash on here, done at 1,000 mile an hour. But there are also some real classic death metal sensibilities creeping in on here. And his vocals, most definitely. And I probably should have mentioned that with Creator as well. Creator, it was a push in a more extreme metal direction, was that vocally. And here is a case in point as well. This album's just majestic. It's all killer, no filler. It's a fucking fantastic record from start to finish. And just blistering. I mean, I think it was a track Inner Self that I might have heard first. Either that or the title track, Beneath the Remains. And again, I think this was around at a mate's house. Like, have you fucking heard this? No, but I want to hear more. So yeah, the fourth record on my journey to death metal is most definitely Sepultura's Beneath the Remains. The fifth record, and like I say, this was the first all-out death metal record that I'd heard. Me and my brother had seen it on cassette in our local record shop and thought, what the fuck is that? And we bought it because it was like $2.99 at the time. Disco Music Centre, Morecambe, near the Arndale Centre. Not there anymore, of course. It was one of them. We just bought it off the cover and the name as if death, leprosy. What? It is, of course, death, leprosy. And this was, for death metal, the light bulb moment. This was, all aspects of thrash had gone, really. This was pure death metal. And yes, I did hear this before. This was the first thing I heard about Death. I'd never heard of them before seeing this cassette in the shop. And it was upon listening to this that I investigated then Scream Bloody Gore, which I didn't think was a patch on this at the time. I've got a newfound respect, obviously, over the years for Scream Bloody Gore, but it's still not as good as this. This is the prototype death metal album. And you could argue still is now. If you wanted a 101 crash course on someone that didn't know what death metal is, you couldn't find a much better place to start them on than this. So yeah, the fifth record I'm going to mention in my descent to death metal is this absolutely seminal piece of work by Death. Leprosy, 1988. Fucking stellar. All killer, no filler, including Rick Ross's whammy shenanigans. The sixth album I'm going to mention is this. I disappeared. I was trying to think. Was there something else I was going to mention about that record? Anyway, it's gone if I was. This. And the levels of extremity have been sort of taken up a notch. Again, the guitar work on this album was otherworldly when I first heard it. So, what the fuck is he doing? All that kind of like sort of switching about chords at a fucking million mile an hour, and yeah, they sounded like no other. And Trey Azagthoth, or however you pronounce that name, is still sort of like no other guitarist. There's not really anyone that sounds like how he constructs riffs, and I think that was a case in point with this. It was then, and it still is, a fucking magnificent record. And this was the one where I knew that I'd left thrash behind at this point when I heard this. It was like, there's very little dialing back from once you've got into this. I still love it now. It is still my favourite Morbid Angel record. It is an absolute fucking masterpiece. It just is. There's not really much other way to fucking describe it. It's a masterpiece. And yeah, I knew at that point that I was death metal wholesale. I remember really early days at high school having a band with a friend. Our first ever band. I can't even remember what the fucking name of it. It was something terrible like Holocaust or something along them like that. Obviously, we then found out there was already a band called Holocaust. But yeah, we thought, right, and it was the first. We'd not recorded anything. We'd literally just jammed like a couple of tracks at one point. But it was the first band split due to musical differences, because I'd gone death metal at that point and wanted to, I was like, no, we need to be more death metal. He's like, no, I'd like to stay. He wanted to be more suicidal tendencies. I wanted to be more Morbid Angel. And yeah, our first split for musical differences. Who knows what that band would have become if we'd just fucking settled our differences and cracked on. But anyway, I'm digressing as I fucking usually do. Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, death metal fucking staple, masterpiece. Now, going back to a band I've already mentioned, but this is the one that just ramped it up a notch for me. Death's Spiritual Healing. And I was, at this point, I was fully entrenched in the death metal thing. It meant everything to me. It was, yeah. And this, like I say, I'm not going to go too much into the details of this record, because I feel like on recent videos I've banged on about this. On several videos I've banged on about this. Personally, still, Death's best record. I think it's just without fault, quite frankly. And yeah, I remember getting this on picture disc, because I don't have the picture disc anymore, but I went, it was either the week or a couple of weeks after it had come out. I'd gone to Blackpool for fucking reasons unknown and was shuffling around. It was either Virgin or Our Price or something like that in Blackpool, wherever it was. If anyone remembers Blackpool, it was nearish the Winter Gardens. So there's like an arcade near there somewhere, a shopping arcade. It was in there fucking somewhere anyway. And I bought this on picture disc and never looked back. It was like, fuck me, it's like Leprosy, only miles better. I'd loved it then and I loved it now, so I don't know whether there's a nostalgia element that influences it, but I just think there's more depth, there's more maturity to the songs on this record. And like I say, at that point, I was fully death metal. So, mentioning the last 3 records quickly was more in a sense of that I'm now fully death metal. So, these were like the next routes that I went. I can't remember the exact order, but I feel like it was this next bird. But anyway, Obituary's Cause of Death. There was the disappointment of knowing that what I loved about Spiritual Healing was James Murphy's guitar solos, and he was no longer in them. He'd had a very short 1-year period with Death. That he'd moved on to this. I can't remember who it was mentioned to me, but they said, yeah, but your man from Death's in that new Obituary album, isn't he, that's coming out? Is he? Oof. This is more... So I have certain issues with Obituary since the absolute classic first 2 records. I might include Incomplete as another really, really fucking stellar record, but it's still not as good as this one. Slow Louis Rot isn't as good as this one. This is their fucking pinnacle, but the first 2 are untouchable for me. And this is... They're so simple, in a sense, with their stylings. It's a very simplistic styling of riffage with that guitar tone that is just pure Tom G Warrior that Trevor Perez always went for. There's no coincidence for me that there's a fucking Celtic Frost cover on this album as well. Is it The End of Side A? Yeah. And yeah, so again, you've got your Circle of the Tyrants on here that's a heart back to that kind of yesteryear thing, and it bridged that gap again as well. Not that Celtic Frost were ever fresh. In fact, I don't really know what you would class them as. But yeah, this was just a pinnacle moment. I listened to this album to fucking death for months, if I remember rightly. It was just everything to me. Trying to work out that creepy opening rhythm riff of Cause of Death and Chopped in Half, and in fact Chopped in Half was one of the few bits of James Murphy soloing that I could do, and it was that whammy that he does at the start of his solo. I couldn't then do that little buzz whammy thing that he does at the end of it and then goes into lots of notes and in a very quick period that yeah, lost me. But absolutely fucking adored this record. It is again a death metal fucking staple. And then it was the descent to the ugly, brutal side of death metal that I'll just show very quickly into. I've dug out this version of it because I seem to remember that I showed the Hooks version of it, although I've just noticed the Hooks picture is on the back of this this picture disc version. But yeah, Autopsy, they still are like no other death metal band for me. There was something just wholly repulsive and ugly about their sound that just hooked me. And like I said, I can't remember. I feel like I got into them right at that point that either Mental Funeral had either just come out or was about to come out, and there was the Retribution for the Dead EP as well The Retribution for the Dead EP, I think, was the first thing I bought of theirs on 12-inch from Ear Records in Lancaster. Yeah, this was the... I feel like our kid bought this on cassette. I think this might have been the first one, and he bought the cassette of it first. So, shout out, brother. But, yeah, just the descent into absolute murky brutality that Autopsy do better than fucking anyone for me, personally. And this, yeah, I'm clearly well hooked on death metal. The last one that I will mention is this. Still my favourite Carcass record. Not a lot to say. Again, I feel like I've done a video on and spouted amazing things about this record previously, or not long previously. Symphony to Sickness, Carcass, still my favourite Carcass record. It's that they've moved away from grind and there's more a straight up death metal vibe with just hints of melody beginning to come into it. Obviously more hints of melody followed on the album that followed this, Necroticism. But this is that perfect bridge between the murky, horrible grind of Recaputrefaction and the more technical melody of Necroticism that followed this. But this is the perfect sit between the two. I fucking loved it. Love it. Loved it then. Love it now. And yeah, pure death metal brutality. And those are my 10 records that show my journey into death metal. Thank you once again, Metal Mickey, for having an idea that I could just fucking pilfer. I will think of my own ideas at some point. But hey, they're just not as good as Mickey's. So, speaking of Metal Mickey, I mentioned on my last video that I might pick up my Decade of Metal and the year in. So that will likely be next week's video. 1998, the year in metal. Six albums, the top 6, the Also Rans, and the Glaring Emission. It's going to be difficult. I've already tried to compile 1998 and it's fucking dog shit for the most part. There's about 6 decent records in its entirety, and I feel like putting them as the top 6 is a bit... It's not really a top 6, is it? It's just 6. But anyway, right, enough of my fucking waffle. Thanks for liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with that extra day, because, yeah, I had that... Uploading it takes for fucking ever sometimes. So, yeah, I ran out of time Monday. So you'll have to make do with it. For those of you watching it as it airs, you'll have to make do with Tuesday. So, yeah. Yeah, thank you, guys. And until the next time, stay posted. Toodle pip.